This video is all about the scientific method, so let's get started. The disclaimer I want to put at the start of this, while I'm labeling my page here with this scientific method. That disclaimer is that yes, we can teach the scientific method in this way, and many textbooks and instructors do, but this isn't necessarily the real way that scientists do science. It's really like the narrative of how we tell that story. A lot of science really kind of happens on accident. It happens because we make observations and we get really interested and we dig into it. And this is how we come up with new ideas and make discoveries and transform the way that we do things in the world. So the scientific method is the way, though, that we write up our discoveries and accidents and really cool new things we couldn't get a hold of, but now we're so interested. Anyways, when we write up all of these experiments as scientists, this is how we do it in this format of the scientific method. That way, somebody who's unfamiliar with your project can say, okay, I can see this narrative of inception to conclusion, and now we understand. So that's my disclaimer. But the scientific method starts off with a question. That's step one, is a question. And feel free to follow along with me in your own notes. The question, it sounds silly, but the question is based on a question. It has a question mark. Includes a question mark. So for example, we could say, okay, well, I like tomatoes, I like tomatoes. So we have two tomato plants in my backyard. Here's one tomato plant. Here's the other tomato plant. But one of my tomato plants only grows like one tomato. I want a lot of tomatoes. My other plant, though, grows a lot of tomatoes. So the question is, why does that happen? Why do some plants have more tomatoes than others? And if you go into a garden, then you might notice something like this. So my example is, why do some plants grow more tomatoes? So we have a question. Has a question mark. And then the next step here is then, well, we need to read up on tomato plants. We need to read up on growing tomato plants. That's the research step. Step two is research. There's a lot that we know and that science knows about tomato plants. And so research, that's looking stuff up and finding stuff out. Looking stuff up, finding stuff out. Importantly, you want to see what's already known. What is already known on this topic? What's already known on this topic? Has somebody asked this specific question before? Has this question been asked before? So has this question been asked before? Okay. So in our example about tomato plants, our question or our research could show us a number of things. So we could research things about plants, and we can find out that plants need water, sunlight, water, sunlight, they need nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen and a bunch of other stuff. We could also find out that plants do photosynthesis. That's good. Photosynthesis. We might also read up and find out that something about pruning tomato plants. So I could prune the tomato plants, and just if you don't know, pruning a plant, so if this is a stem and I have a little branch coming out and another little branch coming out, pruning would be, oh, if I have this little baby branch coming out, I would cut this part off. Don't cut that part off. That's pruning. And the idea behind pruning is, well, we don't really know, but the idea is that you're removing this asset or this future branch so that plant energy can be diverted to growing these branches stronger. Maybe that's part of it. Who knows? So that pruning, and just again, removing little baby branches. Removing those little branches. So we asked the question, we looked stuff up and found out what's known, what's not known about why do tomato plants grow different amounts of plants. So now our next step, step 3, now we want to form a hypothesis. We want to predict a reason, predict the outcome, predict with a statement that answers the question. So now we want to form step 3, hypothesis. And hypothesis is a statement that answers a question. So remember, the question was that thing that we asked, and our example was, why do tomato plants grow different amounts of plants, or grow different amounts of tomatoes? And so our hypothesis would be a potential answer to that question in the form of a statement. A potential answer. So in our example, tomato plants, if I prune tomato plants, then it will grow more tomatoes. So if I prune a tomato plant, then it will grow more tomatoes. Maybe. That's our hypothesis. That's our prediction. Our potential answer. So now, step 4, our next step is we need to do an experiment. Well, we asked a question, we have a potential answer, now we need to test it. So now we design an experiment, then collect data. Design, experiment, Design experiment, collect data. And when we are talking about designing experiments and collecting data, we're talking about looking at variables. Specifically in science, we talk a lot about two major types of variables. One is the independent variable. Independent variable. The independent variable is the variable that's different between the experimental groups. So the independent variable is different between the experimental groups. And I am going to highlight this independent variable because that is a vocabulary word. So in our example of tomato plants, then this would be pruning versus not pruning. So in one group we would prune those plants, and the other group we would not prune those plants to see if pruning the plants makes a difference. So this would be pruning or not pruning. That other variable that's important for us to talk about is the dependent variable. I'm going to scooch up my page here. Dependent variable. And again, I'm going to highlight that because this is a vocabulary word. The dependent variable is the variable being measured. It's the variable that's the outcome. This would be the tomatoes that are grown as a result of the pruning or the not pruning or none of the above. So this would be the number of tomatoes. So this is the variable being measured. In our example, this would be the number of tomatoes grown on the plant. So we've asked the question, we've researched that question, we've proposed a potential solution in the form of a hypothesis for that question. We designed an experiment and collected data, and now what do we need to do? Well, we need to figure out what all of that means. We need to look at that data. So step 5 is analyze the data. Analyze the data. When we talk about science, we talk about two major types of data. So we have two types. We have quantitative data and qualitative data. I'll highlight both of these because they're both vocabulary words. So quantitative data, that refers to numbers. Number data. In our example, we're talking about quantitative data, the number of tomato plants. We say numbers or numerical data. In our example, that's the number of tomatoes. Qualitative data, we call this categorical data. Categorical data refers to different categories or qualities that something may have. So if we wanted categorical data from a tomato plant, we would say, what color are the tomatoes? We have like orange tomatoes and red tomatoes. Or what do the leaves look like? What are the qualities of the leaves we can talk about? Or we can talk about male and female, not in the case of tomatoes, but you're getting the idea that this is categories, different categories that we can assign to that data. And then we have a future lecture on this, but you can graph your data. You can look for patterns. And these two we'll put in a future lecture. And the smiley face. So we can graph that data, we can look for patterns. But then we need to figure, okay, we've analyzed that data, we've designed the experiment to get the data, then we've analyzed that data, and now we need to make some kind of sense of it in the form of a conclusion. That's step 6. Step 6 is make a conclusion. Make a conclusion. Conclusion. We're going to make that conclusion, and we really only have 2 options, 2 choices to make. Do we reject the hypothesis? Is that hypothesis just wrong? Or do we, it's a special phrasing here, do we fail to reject the hypothesis? We fail to reject the hypothesis. Not that we prove the hypothesis is correct, we fail to reject that hypothesis. And the reason is we don't ever really prove anything in science. We don't prove things in science because we could always find out down the road that what we found today is not in fact what really happened. So there's no proving things. It's more just having a lot of data to support a particular idea. So we say it's more like evidence to support the idea. So we have 6 main steps of the scientific method. We asked a question. I'll scroll up so we can take a peek at it. We asked a question, we researched it, we formed a hypothesis, we designed an experiment, collected data, we analyzed that data, which may include different types of data, graphing, looking for patterns, and finally we make that conclusion. That's the scientific method, and we'll see you in another video.